Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to get everything set up as I also eat a Cheez-It. Hey, it's good to see everyone. All right, beautiful. Can everybody see the first slide okay? We'll give a couple of minutes before we get started. I just want to make sure. Move the chat out of the way. Okay, I'm going to turn off my notifications because if not, I will get distracted by them. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and get started just because we've got a lot to cover today, and I hope that's okay with y'all. I'm going to make sure my transcript is on, though. Just give me 1 second. Well, it looks like it's not working. So we will go with it. And then if I need to figure it out from there whenever we're posting the recording, we'll move forward. No big deal. Okay, so y'all, this topic and then the topic that we're talking about next month are my two favorite things. And the reason why I love committed action so much is because I'm a behavior analyst. And I think that's actually why most of us kind of thrive whenever we're thinking about like this kind of like goal development, because it's really what we're going to be talking about today. We're also really going to be talking quite a bit about data collection, what it means, and how we use that to guide our committed action decisions, just as we would as normal behavior analysts, right? And I think this is something that comes up often, and I know we've talked about this before, but there's this idea that ACT is outside of the scope for behavior analysts. And I usually will respond like it will be out of your scope if you aren't practicing it, right? So every single one of you right now you're each demonstrating a committed action. And we've talked about this too. We talked about this when we were talking about values, right? You are living in your values when you attend these CEU events. So what we're talking about here with committed action is you signed in, you're here, and you're participating here in the CEU event. So there's some sort of shared value that's motivating your behavior to engage in this development activity, right? That's all committed action is. And that's how we're going to work on it with our learners as well. But as usual, we're going to talk about how we do this with ourselves before we try to apply this to somebody else's life. Okay, so our learning objectives for today, we are going to discuss what is this? What are committed actions? We're going to define them. We are going to talk about how we're going to measure them, right? That's pretty much what this most of this course is about, this webinar today. And then how are we going to develop or objectively define or pinpoint our SMART goals? And then, of course, giving the opportunity for us to practice ourselves. Okay. Oh man, we knew this was going to happen, right? We have already said the word already. We know that values matter. We know that this is still that kind of reinforcement that's not truly reinforcement, that's also reinforcement because it's providing that MO for us to engage in these ongoing behaviors. So our values and our learners' values and our learners' families' values, our personal values, our families' values, they still matter. And they each provide that MO for us to continue to assent to whatever it is. So an example right now would be like if this in this exact slide, you're like, nope, this no longer aligns with my values, you would just close your computer, hit end, sign off, whatever, right? That is withdrawing your assent. That is signaling and making a choice that this is no longer in alignment with my values, or my values don't aren't giving me enough capacity for this to be motivating for me to continue to engage. They may have allowed me to initially assent, but that ongoing assent is no longer there, right? That happens a lot often for us. So for me, it's going to the gym on a scheduled basis, right? So I'm like, I am going to put in my agenda. In fact, I think I even did it this week, which by the way, this week has been like 2 weeks long. I don't know about y'all, but I put in my weekly self-care plan. You can barely see it, but I said that I'm going to walk, I'm going to do yoga, and I'm going to meditate. And I do this every week. And say what I'm going to do. I have walked once this week. I have not done yoga at all. And I have meditated one time, and that was because I was having a panic attack. So when we talk about values, sometimes they don't always carry us through as long as we would like to. So I withdrew my assent from going to the gym today, right? Or yesterday or whatever day it was. And that was because it didn't align in that moment. There wasn't enough pushing me to go forward with that, right? And we've all gone through that. We've even gone through it where we love what we do, right? We're behavior analysts who love working with children or adults, and we show up every single day, except for those some days when we wake up and we're like, nothing would actually motivate me through today. I really just need to kind of turn on some Netflix, watch Love is Blind, and I really want to have like a time where I can just watch Love is Blind. I live vicariously through Instagram posts where people tell me what's happening on the show, but it sounds amazing. But I guess I also don't have enough motivation to assent to watching that full season. So again, please keep up the stories. I love hearing what's happening on these types of shows. Um, Same with like Real Housewives. I live like vicariously through that kind of drama because I don't like that kind of drama in my own life. But I'm like, ooh, these women are choosing this. Okay, tell me more about it. I just don't want it to be a part for me. Does that make sense? Do y'all ever have those moments? All right, so let's define what are committed actions. So we've pretty much been talking about it a little bit, but it's where our values and our behavior meet. That's it. That's 100% it. It is a behavior that is leading us closer towards what we feel is something that we value, while that value is providing that ongoing, hopefully, motivation to continue. That's what a committed action is. I've committed to these behaviors, and here's why. You don't actually have to say here's why, but you can commit to these behaviors. So this is what it might look like for us. And this is what we would start with, right? So we've gone through that kind of assessment. We've assessed what our values are, but have we actually assessed what some of our avoidance or our barrier behaviors are? We definitely have done that with our learners, right? I know that I can like say like, hey, Anne Marie, like name me like what are the avoidance behaviors, like the topography for this kiddo? And Anne Marie would be like, this, and this. But it might be more difficult if Anne Marie were to shift it and flip it onto me and say, hey, Meg, what are your avoidance behaviors? What are your barriers? Oh, well, let's go back to my gym example. What was my barrier there? I'll be real. I kind of tweaked my shoulder and I used that as an excuse to not go to the gym. I was like, oh, but it kind of hurts right now. I don't think, I think I'm going to hurt it more if I go. And we really don't want that. So I'm just going to avoid any sort of discomfort that might actually probably make my shoulder feel better, in all honesty, because I don't want to. Really, like that's comes down to like the most of it for like a lot of our kids and for ourselves. Like, what is this avoidance? Because I don't want to. Sometimes the committed action that we need to be engaging in is a values-based conversation. That is a really beautiful way of saying a really hard conversation. So it might be easier for us to avoid having those really hard conversations. And we can do this in several different ways. We might engage in passive aggressive communication. We might just be like full out avoidance of like, la, 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 everything's fine. I'll just dig my hand in the sand and nothing will happen, right? We might say that it's not that big of a deal, dismiss it, right? Or we might start to engage in the conversation and then we withdraw our assent. But maybe it's because our values weren't pushing us enough or we got a little too scared. And fear is quite often what I find to be one of those underlying factors, fear factor, to avoidance. We will often engage in avoidance behaviors because we are afraid. Well, what if I say, Rosie, I really want to have this really difficult conversation with you, but then I make Rosie feel something uncomfortable and then she starts crying and then I feel bad because I made her cry, right? That's a big one for me. I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. That's out of alignment with my values. So, how do I engage in a values-based conversation without engaging in avoidance? Well, it's because this is what I would go, and I'm going to use Rosie as my example here, like a conversation with her. I value her friendship more than I would value something else. And I also know that if I were to say, like, hey, this is a really hard conversation. I'm going to do like a little baby step into this committed action to signal that this is going to be hard, right? And that's one of the ways that we can do it. But that's also putting my values of our friendship at the forefront of that conversation. I actually don't even know if Rosie's on this call right now. So hopefully she's like watching the recording later and she's like, oh, cool. Thanks. Sorry. But anyway, all of these things too are very much observable, right? So we can observe these things. We can observe our own behaviors. We can observe our own avoidance. We can label and tact what it is that we're avoiding or what the behaviors are that are that are signaling this avoidance, right? We can do all of these things, and because we do them with our learners all the time. We just might leave out that part about what's the values check. What value can I attach to this, right? So then what you have to do, you've determined what that avoidance is for yourself. You've checked in with your values as to why maybe you were avoiding some of these things, and then what value might lead you toward committed action. You observe what it is that you are going to be doing. So, like, once you do it, right, you're observing it. You can be like, I am observing this. We can also talk about observing our thoughts, right? But that's going to be in next month's topic. But we're going to talk about what we can observe that's overt, right? The behavior analyst stream, the thing that every behavior analyst tells us the act is mentalistic. Oh, lo and behold, here we are with committed action, and it is all very observable, right? Cool. So you're going to create, here's that signal, here's that SD of when I might typically engage in avoidance response, but instead I'm going to engage in an alternative behavior that's going to contact reinforcement. So this is the sequence that you're going to set. Does that sequence look familiar to everyone? Do we see this often? We've got the stimulus, we've got the behavior, and we've got the consequence, the reinforcement. So this is committed action. Everything that y'all are used to doing are committed actions. All of these alternative behaviors and replacement behaviors that we're putting in place for our learners, as long as they align with our learners' values, and probably our values as well, are going to be committed action. And I will also argue this, that if what you're proposing or what goals or what behavior change you're proposing or alternative behaviors that you're proposing are not values-based, you're going to know because you actually don't have that quote unquote buy-in that you're looking for, right? It's not actually a socially developed or socially valid goal that you're trying to develop. So what I would suggest is start with the values, like what we've been talking about. Make sure that what you're proposing is going to be in alignment with the family's values and with the client's or the learner's values so that what you're still doing is still going to be observable, but it's also going to help contact both environmental reinforcement as well as having that underlying intrinsic motivation keeping us going. So while we can't observe the intrinsic motivation, we can observe the assent behaviors that support that intrinsic motivation is still happening. Does that make sense? Yes, thanks, Bree. You know, I love a little positive affirmation in the chat box, so truly appreciate it. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Rama. And Rama, thanks for joining us again. I love having you from all the way across the pond. It's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to get into the literature now because another thing that we've got to consider whenever we're talking about behavior analysis, right? So we're going to go through some of these articles. This one, is it pulling up? Oh, yay. Woohoo! I love it when technology works for me. So this one is a mixed methods, right? So not some, what? Okay, experimental intervention exercises for values and committed action from ACT, Mental Health Promotion Program for University Students. How cool. How many of you would have benefited from this as a university student or a grad student? I definitely would have. Definitely would have. Yep, absolutely, Kimberly. Absolutely, Anne Marie. We totally would have. Because here's what we know. Mental health challenges arise really quickly when we are experiencing unknown, unfamiliar, and new stressors. I don't know about y'all. I loved my college experience. However, it was all new friends, new coursework, new way of learning, new ways of being presented materials, new communities, new things that we were trying to build, like rush or fraternity parties, all of these things, right? All of it's new. And so then you add in the stress of, oh, this change happened, or you've got midterms, or this is the hardest class you've ever taken in your entire life. I hope you pass it, added to all of that. So you already have this kind of unstable foundation. Everybody's parents were like, no, I sent them off to school with such a great, strong foundation. That's so not true. But I think many parents do think that that's what happened. But the reality is that they prepared them while they were growing up, but now they're in college. And so it's this unstable environment, right? And then we're adding all of these stressors on top of it. I have so many friends who I went to college with who ended up leaving, going home, going to a different college, transferring out completely, changing to a different type of program. All of these things happened, right? They withdrew their assent because whatever it was that was within their value system was not strong enough to continue this motivation under the context and within the context and conditions of the university life experience, the college experience. Does that sound accurate for many of us? Yeah, absolutely. So, what this study did was it took the components of these students' values. It took in all of the different components of ACT, but then what it did was it went into committed action exercises, which I love this, by the way. I don't know if y'all read what YOLO stands for. It is actually the you only live once, right? Yeah, you only live once. So they had and that's so college appropriate, right? So university age appropriate. So they've got this like YOLO mindset. So they've created this committed action exercises around you only live once. You only have this one opportunity to do this. So I think that it was actually really cool. A really, really, really cool study. Um, they talked about the things, how this worked for their students, and you'll notice too what they ended up doing. So they identified what they wanted their educational goals to be. Then they went through and they said, how are we going to make these SMART goals? We're going to get into SMART goals in the next little bit. So hold on to that thought. Then they went through what are their values? What do they value as these students? There's one value that stayed with me this whole time throughout like my like I don't this is like the only one that's like not a proto one for me, but even in college, honesty was one of like my number one values. And so it's interesting that that's the one that's kind of like stayed with me too. So it's in, I wonder what I would have also selected as my values as a kid, or as a kid, sorry, as a college student, um, back then, right? Do y'all ever think about that? That self-reflection piece is so important. But I also don't know really and truly what else I would have valued. It probably would have been incredibly beneficial for me that if at 18 or 19 years old, somebody had set me down and said, like, hey, what are the things that you love? What are the things that you would do even if you never got paid for it? Even if it was really hard? Even if, right? What are those things that you would do? And I think that would have been really helpful for me. I will say my dad ended up doing like an informal values assessment with me whenever I was a senior in college. That was really helpful. However, I probably could have benefited from it when I was a senior in high school and not college. So, just kind of, this is a really great article. Y'all, of course, have access to it. So just let me know if for some reason it's not pulling up. You know, I'm happy to give it to you. There are no walls here. Um, and then they completed a self-assessment task, and then they reconnected with their values. I think this is really cool. It's a really measurable study, and it's something that we can take as professionals and people and apply in our own lives without saying, like, now I have to apply this to a learner. No, we don't have to apply this to our supervisees. It could work, great, but that's not what this is about, right? This is about starting with ourselves. But speaking of our supervisees, since they're here and in our lives, we should talk about what the research says about committed action and our supervision. I love this article. It's a really, really, really beautiful read. Um, really, anything that these phenomenal women have written is going to be fantastic. But this one is a great way of representing how we as supervisors can promote values and committed action with our supervisees and practicing these values-based exercises, giving feedback, but then recognizing, this is one of the things that I love, recognizing that aversive private events can result in the supervisor's behavior being dominated by escape and avoidance. Did we talk about that a second ago? Yep, we sure did. When we were talking about avoidance behaviors, we were talking about how sometimes we don't like to have difficult conversations. Sometimes we as supervisors, anytime I say we, please know that I mean me. Sometimes that I, as a supervisor, struggle to give feedback. Or what I will also do, and I think this is also really common, is I'll be like, oh my God, I've given so much corrective feedback that I feel like I, I can't give another piece of corrective feedback. I'm going to lose this person. She's going to think, or he's going to think that they're the worst person in the world. And maybe it's my own struggle with like perfectionism and not necessarily like a critical piece of the fidelity of this program or a critical piece. And maybe it's not a critical piece for the supervisee to then move on to like sit for their wards, right? That I think is something that we all struggle with so much. Oh yeah. I feel that too. So much, Brie. It can weigh on you. And then sometimes too, I'll feel like, man, I've only given positive feedback. And then the next day I'll go in and I'll go into a supervision session with that same person. And I'm like, now I'm going to have to give you corrective feedback, but that feels weird because yesterday I just gave you a whole bunch of praise, right? That also happens. And so again, like like my example when I was talking about like having a difficult conversation with Rosie, I might say this might be difficult. I'm going to name that inner behavior before we get started. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it's a step into our committed action of providing feedback. And that's motivated by our shared value of compassionate care and ABA services, hopefully, or whatever it might be. But more than likely, you and your supervisees have a shared value. What Hess and all are suggesting is that you talk about that pretty early on. You talk about like, okay, what do you value as a supervisor? What does your supervisee value? Now, how are y'all going to meet together and form a values alliance, right? And then this is the part that I think is something that should be discussed at the very beginning. What's going to happen if there is a values misalignment? What can I do or say if like at one moment my supervisee is like, you know what? I didn't enjoy how you gave me that feedback. Do you think that supervisee is ever going to say that to me? No. It's really hard. It's really hard to say that. But if you've set up this space to say, like, this is a difficult conversation, you've modeled that, right? That helps so much. Oh my gosh, Anne Marie, I love that in your supervision contracts, you have values. That's such a beautiful thing to add that not many people would add. But I would say also that that is like a great committed action that's observable and measurable, right? Because you can say, like, oh, you have these values written down in our supervision contract. They're now a part of our binding agreement, right? So we can check in on this on a regular basis and say, like, are we still meshing? Are we still vibing? Are we still grooving? Does this still align with what it is that you want to do and how you're doing it? Um, so again, this article is fantastic. It talks a lot about how ACT actually does provide quite a bit of benefit while throughout the training process. So they have a pre-test and a post-test example. They went through behavioral skills training as well as what this looks like through other types of training procedures. And it's really pretty neat to see what they found. They did find that if you look at their baseline here, they did find that even at follow-up, people were maintaining these high levels of committed actions, right? That's pretty cool. And again, like this is sessions, it doesn't give us dates. We don't know, like, I don't know that this was January 1st to January 13th. If it was, I would be kind of disappointed. So let's assume that these sessions happened once a week. Great. So we've got 13 weeks of this. That's a pretty good supervision period, right? That's longer than what we would consider, or that's about like a school semester too, if we look at it that from that perspective as well. So if we look at this and take it as like this was a school semester, and here was our baseline, we were below 40, 20, 40, 20, 30-ish, 30-ish, right? And then once we started doing all of these exercises, we stayed pretty high. We may have had a couple of dips, we stayed pretty high. And it makes sense that on Dion's follow-up that she had a dip and then went back up, right? That makes a lot of sense based on what she did during the post-training follow-up. I just think it's a really neat study for us to look at. It also is a great way for us to, I think, embed this kind of like burnout prevention as an antecedent strategy. So I encourage y'all to read this article. It's really cool. I also encourage you to do what Anne Marie is doing, which is put those values in the contract. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't write the contract until I meet with them for the first time. And then we go through it together. And then if there's something that we need to add, like their values, we're going to do that before we sign everything, right? So that's just my suggestion when it comes to supervision in that kind of realm. Cool. But that's, again, one of my all-time favorite articles. Beautiful. Now let's move on a little bit more to data data or data. It doesn't really matter. I don't care what you say because I say both. It depends on who I'm talking to. So data matter even when we're talking about our feelings. And I'm talking about our own personal feelings. Okay. We can take data on these things because we can observe them. No, we can't observe the inner behavior of our learners. However, we can say this is a shared experience with our learners, right? We can say that we have a shared value with our learners. And sometimes these shared values are also inner behaviors, inner feelings, thoughts that also motivate what's happening in our external world and environment. So we're going to talk about this. So data are how we analyze behavior over time. It's how we see things. It's how we look at what's happening, right? We look at our graphs, we do data analysis, we do visual analysis, and we say, I'm going to make a decision based on what I just saw. We're going to do the same thing with our committed actions. So how do we like to take data? Well, it kind of depends. If you're in my agency, how do we like to take data? Does anybody know? Rate. And there's a reason. Because we need to know what this is like over time. If somebody told me that they had 65 redirections, I would say, oh, wow, that's a lot of redirections. But what if they said that it was 65 redirections over 36 hours? I would say, like, oh, well, that's actually not that high. So then what if I said they had 2 redirections per hour? That's also okay. Like, I get it. But do you see there's a difference, right? Because if I look at 65 versus 2, my data are going to be really, really off. They're going to look like I had a giant jump when I didn't. I just measured one across 36 hours and I measured one across 1 hour. But if I move this one that I measured at 36 hours and I just divide it by however many hours I actually saw that person, well, now I am closer to that 2. Does that make sense? So our data become closer together whenever we actually measure them by rate because we can see it more easily. And we're going to look at this in just a second too. I also love duration because sometimes things happen for a long period of time. I like to score when somebody is engaged in some sort of level of engagement for a duration. How long were they engaged with this before they withdrew their assent? I can measure that, right? I can also measure that like rate over time. So I can say 20 minutes per hour, they engage in this, or one time per 5 minutes, or whatever it is you might want to say. Cool. You can also score it if you absolutely have to, because everybody likes to claim that efficiency and time is like their biggest like issue. Cool. Then score it as an interval if you absolutely have to. But just know that you're leaving a lot of data on the table when you score interval, whether whole interval or partial interval, you're leaving data on the table. So just be aware of that. You can also just score occurrences or non-occurrences, but notice what I put here, overtime. Because again, and that's still rate, but the reason why we want to do it over time is because it actually matters. So this is actually an example from an upcoming book that I'm a co-author with from Reframe ABA. And we did a little bit of a comparison of what we were talking about here with percent correct versus rate versus duration, and which one's going to give us the most relevant information. So let's look at this table here. It says that on day 1, this learner engaged in this behavior 50% of the time. Day 2, 65% of the time. Day 3, 57. Day 4, 69, leaving us with a 4-day average of 60%. Okay, it looks really stable, right? If we were to look at this on a graph, like we would be hovering around that 60 line. We've all seen these types of graphs. We've also seen them where they look like this, and we say that's a 50% average. And I'm like, going from 100 to 0, 100 to 0 to 100 to 0, and then saying that the 5-day average of 50% is straight BS, and we should all know that. So I'm going to encourage y'all to, if you get anything out of this webinar tonight, maybe let's see how we're taking data and what's going to be the most accurate way. So I'm going to read our little snippet here. So we have that we learned then that, sorry, I'm just looking here. Oh yeah. So we're trying to determine like what modification needs to be made. So we've got this BCBA who's looking at this data and they're like, you know what? I actually don't know if we need to make any sort of modification. And then another BCBA comes in and they're like, well, let's look at the raw data and what might that tell us? Well, the raw data might be significantly different. And the reason why the raw data might be significantly different is because you might have 7 out of 10, right? And that's 70%. And then You might have 1 out of 3, and that's 30%. But there's a significant difference. You have 10 opportunities here that you're measuring versus 3 opportunities over on the next day that you're measuring. That's not the same. And I think that's often when we see those graphs that are like 100, 0, 100, 0. And I find this often with like manding targets, where they'll say like, oh, well, there was the opportunity for them to do this, and they engaged in a 5+ word mand one time. So that was 100%. But then the next day, it was a different BT, and they only gave them one opportunity to respond and didn't say anything else after that. And it was a prompted response, so they zero, 5+ word man. Meanwhile, the next day on day 3, another behavior technician comes in, and their whole mission that day is to try to get 10 man trials. So what they're going to do is they're going to present opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to get a higher score, right? That's why that person was at 70 and the other person was at 0. So now I'm going to give them 10 trials and they got 8. Now they're at 80. But then guess what? The next day, the same old other BT is going to come in and then just run it once or twice and then be like, it was just 50% or it's just 25%. Your data now look like this. They look like crap. You cannot make an informed decision based on that. However, I would say y'all need to be increasing your trial counts. You can't just do one. However, if you're just looking at the percent, you won't know that that's what's happening. You won't necessarily know that Trish is doing 2 trials a day and that Cindy's doing 15 trials a day. Those data aren't comparable unless you make them comparable. And the only way to make them comparable, in my opinion and clinical experience, is through the standard acceleration chart. So by doing it by rate. And then you'll also have your raw data and you'll know, Cindy, you've got to do more than that, than those few trials. You've got to do up that count, girl, right? But we won't know unless we actually have the data to back it up. So committed actions and data go hand in hand because we won't be able to do anything unless we are measuring it and taking data on it. How many of you are familiar with the chart, which is this blue graph down here? Yes, beautiful. If you aren't familiar with it, I would suggest getting a little familiar with it. It seems so daunting and confusing, but it's really not. And if you are really worried about it, about starting it, start with 1 minute, 1 minute at a time. And then you don't have to worry about doing a lot of math. It's just 1 minute at a time. All of these charts are designed to be scored at that. So then you can just change it based on what you need it to look like. So we're going to go through some other examples of what they look like here in just a second. Cool. And there we go. Oh no, we've advanced too quickly. Okay, so SMART goals. Yes. So this means that we have measurable and attainable objectives that we're putting in place. I have added a little B, and that's to address those barriers, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So this article is another fantastic one, how the application of SMART goals can contribute to the achievement of student learning outcomes. Again, this isn't with our typical autistic population, although I will say that these are all very much able to be applied there, but we start with ourselves first. So we're going to set ourselves our own SMART goals. And what SMART means, sorry, this is based on the literature here, is that they are specific. So you've set a specific goal, motivated by your values. I would also then say that they're child-led because you're including their interests and their values. Adaptive. So you can modify these based on the data that we were just talking about. They're realistic. So I just have on mine right? I didn't write SMART goals, and maybe that was one of my problems. I didn't say that I was going to do yoga X amount of times for X along like X duration, but maybe I should have. And maybe I should have said, you know what? It's not realistic for me to say that I'm going to do all three things right here. I'm going to take one of these off and recognize that all I'm going to do is walk one time this week and meditate one time this week. That's okay. I can adapt it and I can change it to that. Oh, time framed over time. Most of us, when we are writing our goals, only think about authorization periods. And we will say over that this learner will demonstrate XYZ skill across 3 consecutive sessions. And that's what we say is over time. That is BS. And I think we all know it. And the reason why we all know it is because you don't get anything after 3 sessions, and sometimes you get more after 1 session. So why are you dragging this on for 2 more sessions? That's not time-based, even though you've put a timestamp on it. Making it time-based and measured over time means that you're applying rate to it. You're saying that these many things will happen over this specific time. So just go ahead and picture in your mind what it looks like to do a fraction. I'm going to do it 2 times over 5 hours. I'm going to do it 1 time for 1 hour, so 12 hours. Or 1 time per day, sorry, so like 12 hours, like waking day, right? So that's an easy way for us to see this and see that things should be across time. I added the B for SMART B. So identify and plan for these barriers. Those barriers that we identified at the very beginning when we were talking about, though, this is the behavior that I engage in when I'm engaging, when it's active avoidance. Okay, now when you're writing out your goal, your SMART goal, how are you going to address when this barrier arises? Just like any good behavior analyst, we've put in place some sort of behavior intervention plan, some sort of response plan, as well as antecedent plan. So I would say that for my antecedent plan, I need to make a modification for this avoidance barrier and adapt and modify what it is that I'm doing, right? Based on that. But then in the future, because of what happened this past week, well, man, I'm gonna have to make an antecedent intervention change and say, you know what? Okay, I've got this, and this going on next week. So, uh, oh man, my week looks really hectic. So maybe if I just look at meditating 1 time per day, that might be the only thing that I might be able to attain for next week. So when I'm looking at my barrier behaviors, I'm going to say, I'm not going to put on my schedule that I'm going to go do yoga, but I am going to say meditate. And I might even do like a little check, like, did I meditate? So that at the end of the day, I can check it off and say, like, I measured it, right? So those are again like ways that we can address these barriers. We can do the same things with our learners. So when that behavior comes up and we're starting to see this kind of avoidance and they're moving away, they're withdrawing their assent, what are we going to do to get them back on track if that's what's best for them in that moment and in that context? That's going to be something for us to identify, and it's going to be one of those it depends situations, right? It's a context by context, moment by moment, person by person situation. Okay, so we have some example goals here. I love timings. I just left one of our kiddos who is a master at timings. She charts her own behavior. We're going to show one of her charts here in just a second. But she does counts and timings all day long. That is what gets her through all of the stuff that she has to do. She loves fluency-based programming because it's fast and it's easy and it's attainable. It's measurable. It's something that she enjoys doing. It's child-led for her. And then one of the things that we do for her timings is we might have her say, she struggles a lot with feeling loved and feeling as though people care about her. So we might have her do just like 30 seconds of telling me every reason that you know that you're loved. Or tell me how you know that The people in your life care about you, and she'll name all of them. One of the things that she's just put in place, which I love, and I'm giving a shout out to one of my all-time favorite BCBAs, Tommy, you're fantastic. So, one of our clinical BCBAs put in place a timings procedure for her for committed action, right? Two birds, one stone. Fantastic. So, what she did is we know what she values. She values spending time with her mom. She truly values making herself feel proud, and she values feeling loved, right? Those are three things that she truly, truly, truly values. So, what Tommy put in place for her was to put in a timings exercise where she named as many behaviors and actions as she could that align with those values. It's beautiful. She does it for about 30 seconds. Right now, she's on about like six or seven that she's averaging that she can readily name and say, like, I can do this and I can do that. I can say this, I can do this, I can ask for this. Those are all committed actions. And she's put them all in a timing. And the reason that she's done that is so that now they're more fluent for her, right? Tommy like really thought forward with this one, which was like now she's building up this toolbox of whenever I'm struggling with this feeling of not feeling loved or cared for, I can pull out this committed action and start engaging in that. But the reason that she can pull it out is because she said it to herself so many times. She's done this fluency timing so many times that it's just there, right? So we can also count our inner behavior. This one's we can't do with our kiddos as easily. We can ask them about it and ask for that verbal report. But for ourselves, we can count inner behavior. I can count that on my from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, I had six inner behaviors, six thoughts that made me think that I wasn't going to get something done, that I was irritated, that I was frustrated, that I was stressed, and that I had a lot of anxiety and that everybody hated me, right? Is that pretty normal for most people within an hour? Maybe, maybe not. But we all do have these inner behaviors that come up. And sometimes it might be really valuable for us as individuals and as human beings to count when you have those thoughts and those feelings arise. Just for the thought of awareness and observation, you're strengthening that skill of self-awareness, which gives you then the ability to be more introspective when you're looking at and learning, or excuse me, observing your learners, so that then you can say, like, oh man, I can see there's this shift right here that I wouldn't have observed before when I wasn't observing my own behavior, right? So when we're doing these things for ourselves, we're strengthening our skills for our learners as well. We just have to remember, like remind ourselves of that too, with our own committed action. Okay, so our we can do this stepwise. We don't have to throw in the full task analysis or the full chain to start. Do baby steps. That's what I was talking about with our learner earlier. We do little tiny fluencies. So we're building up these little bitty things as she goes so that then we can combine them together. And then it's this greater skill set, as opposed to overwhelming her with presenting it all at the same time. Cool. And I also love just this kind of like continuous idea of like analyzing what it is that we do, making choices, using choice point if we need some sort of visual, using the hexaflex as well if we need another visual. So this is a timings chart. Isn't that cool? So overwhelming and so daunting for so many of us. But she can do it. She's doing a 30-second CSAY. This This CSAY is not for her like positive affirmations. This one's for multiplication skills. So you can see like up here it says the slicer that she's doing times twos, or I think that says times twos, times four, times five, times six. So we're looking at what we're doing here, and then we're measuring the same. Yeah, it's times twos for four times, four, five, and six. So we were building that skill, but she charted all of this herself. We didn't chart this for her. We checked it. We had her erase some things. We had her correct some things, right? But if you notice too, so we've got some erase marks at the beginning, but then at the end, the second half, she doesn't need any correcting. She's got it. She's fluent now in this skill. Isn't that awesome? So we can do this. This might be a fun way to chart what's happening whenever you've got these inner behaviors coming up. You might say, like, ooh, on this day, in this first column, I'm just going to be scoring Thursday, April, whatever today is, 17th. And I'm going to notice that this thought came up, and this thought, and this thought, and this thought. So, as I said, like I had 6 thoughts come up in 1 hour. I'm going to score those 6 thoughts. And then maybe after the CEU, only 3 thoughts come up. That's probably not true. It's probably going to be closer to the 15. But anyway, I'm going to count them. I'm going to see what thoughts arise. And I'm going to chart that, but I'm going to keep that on that same first column here. And then I'm going to see what it looks like over the day. Ooh, I went from here to here, right? Well, let's see what happens tomorrow. And then we're going to do it that way. But what's really cool is that we can also see this on a large scale and across multiple days as they sequence. And we're going to show you an example of that as well, because we're going to practice this now. We've self-assessed. You know what you value. What did your self-assessment determine? What choices now can you make based on those values that you've identified? What alternative behaviors are you going to reinforce in your own life as committed actions? Choose it. Choose one that you're going to engage in. Then measure it. Okay, so this is how I like to do it. And I changed it a lot, as you can see. I've got lots of different slices and phase lines here. The reason I do is because I kept changing what actually mattered to me. This was, and it's hard to see over here because it's in my chicken scratch, but my thought process was to see how often I engage in stress responses. And then if I engaged in a response strategy of something like meditating, walking, or yoga. I don't know if y'all can tell, those are my 3 strategies for coping. So I tried. It was really hard because I thought that what I should be doing is engaging for a long period of time. And that was the only thing that was going to be meaningful for me. So I tracked my durations of how long I engaged in meditation or yoga. And that's what this is right here. We've got this timings bar right here that's orange. I didn't make my goal. In fact, I made it so unattainable for myself that I felt like giving up, and I did here for about a week, 10 days. And I said, you know what? I've got to get back into this. Got to change something to try something else. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to try this as an antecedent intervention. Instead of a response strategy, we're going to do an antecedent intervention. And I'm going to engage in walking, meditation, or yoga before I engage in a stress response. I did actually pretty well. However, my goal here, I don't know if you can read what it says. It says to increase the frequency that I do yoga, meditate, or walk. It didn't work. Like I'm still trying, it still wasn't attainable for me because then I wasn't able to necessarily like meditate 6 times. I may have only had 1 time to meditate that day, like enough time to do that. And so I was like, all right, well, let's make another modification, right? I feel like we all feel this way whenever we're doing interventions for learners. It's also really frustrating when you're doing it for yourself. And this is the easiest thing to throw away and not deal with, right? It's so much easier for us to avoid this than it is for us to avoid our paychecks, right? So I made another modification. And this one was if I feel stress, so again, going back to my response strategy, I'm going to engage in one of these behaviors. It also didn't quite work because if you look here, all of these little triangles are when I had a stress response. So what ended up happening was I was increasing my stress responses and decreasing the frequency that I was actually demonstrating these things. So I was like, well, crap, y'all. This is why this matters. This is why these data help us. I'm going to try to zoom in just a little bit. Oh, no, I can't. Okay, just kidding. But if y'all want a photocopy of this so you can see the demise, I'm happy to share it with you. So then I learned maybe I actually just need to do this once a day and things might get better for me. So I actually did, and things got somewhat better, but then you can see too, suddenly we're getting this X, suddenly my stress responses are increasing again. So then what do? Active avoidance for 3 weeks. Does that sound accurate for most of us? If we like, this is like the most vulnerable thing that I feel like I share with people, but like we don't share our own data for a reason. And it's because we don't want to say, like, this is how long I actually engaged in avoidant behaviors. I was tantruming during this time. I was crying quite a bit. Like all of the behaviors that would be on one of our treatment plans, check, check, checkity check, right? So let me double down and tell my learners that what they should be doing instead, right? That's the behavior analyst way. That's what we do best. So thanks for the validation, y'all. I'm so glad that we're all in this together. So I was in active avoidance for several weeks. And then I was like, all right, let's get back into it. But notice here, I didn't do another modification. I accepted the fact that if I were just to engage in one of these behaviors, it would more than likely decrease my stress responses. And then I might start assenting to these alternative behaviors more frequently. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So, this is what you want to see when you're looking at a chart. You want to see these dots go up and the other ones go down. And so, what these dots that are going down are my stress responses. And the dots that are going up are my committed actions. I did it, y'all. I'm so proud of myself. And then I never did one of these again. And I'm being 100% honest. But it's because this is good information for me. And I also now can take this and know, like, when I'm starting to demonstrate higher rates of stress responses, more than likely, I haven't been doing what I need to do to prevent those stress responses. All of those inner behaviors that I had for about an hour were probably because today I did jack all, right? To prevent any of this from happening. I didn't meditate, I didn't walk, didn't do any yoga. I woke up kind of riled up. And you'll also know this because I didn't put a post, like a new post. It was an old post. Yep. So I did like an old post from like 2020, pulled that one up for my stories today, and then just kind of stewed for a while. Does this sound accurate for anybody else? Where you're just like, yeah, I'm going to have my coffee and stew. And then I'm going to get to the clinic and I'm going to be kind of bitchy. And the reason I'm going to be kind of bitchy is because I've been stewing all day long. And then when all of these other thoughts come up, that's right, stew and brew all the time. Whenever these other thoughts come up, I'm going to actively avoid them and push them away and double down on something else that will distract me, such as reading a graph, doing supervision that I probably don't actually have to do. Or I love that, Brie. Tell my husband that you get to be grumpy today. And that's it. But I will say this, that's more of a committed action than most people would engage in. Thank you for at least signaling to your husband that you're in a grumpy mood. Most people would just be in a grumpy mood and expect everybody to deal with it. But I like that, Brie. I think that's fantastic. So this is what I'm going to encourage y'all. You need to start with your inner behavior. And this is one of my all-time favorite human beings, Dr. Rick Kubina. He's also a precision teacher. So if you ever have any questions, ask him. He's got the precision teaching book sitting on my shelf right there. It's a huge blue and purple book. You'll learn everything that you need to know there. I promise. It's a fantastic resource. But one of the things that Rick Kubina has said is, shame on you if you are not considering inner behavior because you're doing a disservice to our field. Would y'all agree with that statement? I 100% agree with that statement. Absolutely, right? So this article is actually from 1994. Reducing negative inner behavior of senior citizens, the 1 minute counting procedure. This article is short and it's fantastic. Highly recommend y'all read this one. This one is one that I don't know if y'all also noticed that John Cooper wrote this with him too. So this predates the Brown and Kubina replication study of increasing positive thoughts in an autistic adolescent, right? Um, that was the article that just came out a couple of years ago. So read this one. This was a fantastic one. Cooper also was a huge precision teacher, applied behavior analysis, the white book, that Cooper. He published another study that was, can this marriage be saved? Because he kept having negative thoughts about his wife and he was kind of being a dick to her. And so he was like, well, crap, we're either going to get divorced or I need to figure something out and change my own behavior. So he started counting his own inner behavior. And what he did is every time that he had a negative thought about his wife, he switched it and he said something positive about her instead. And then he did positive timings, right? Isn't that so cool? Just being aware of what our thoughts are doing can change our behavior. And that's really what Kubina and Cooper were trying to say here. And that's what Kubina has been saying for quite some time. We share inner behavior. We share inner behavior, and so we have to start dealing with it. Beautiful. And then this is something I like to say. We often think that we're acting in our values, but the reality is that we're not. We're often engaging in something that we're good at, and we call that a value, or we're doing something that we thought we wanted for ourselves, but it doesn't actually fit our current narrative, right? So it's important that we recognize that when we have these types of discomforts and we have these kind of really uncomfortable feelings, it's because it's probably out of alignment with our values. We need to check in with that inner behavior so that then we can make a shift to do something else and engage in an alternative behavior. Yeah, cool. So that's all I have for y'all today. And I'm actually really surprised because it's never have I done a full just like on the dot and on the dot. And I'm just gonna do a little pat, pat, pat. So y'all, committed action that's what we do, right? But we have to start with our inner behavior. We have to start with those signals to know what we need to do. And then once we're able to do that for ourselves, it becomes so much easier to do with our learners. Cool. Awesome, y'all. Well, this one was a lot of fun. Do y'all have any questions about committed action? Because our next talk next month, which will be the third Thursday of the month, I'm just going to double check the date. And I went ahead again, thanks, Rosie, committed action style. I went ahead and scheduled it out. So y'all should have calendar invites for all of them. But the next one will be May 15th. Does that sound good to everyone? Awesome. We're going to be talking about self as context. It's my all-time favorite one. Okay, y'all, thank you. Tommy, thank you. And thanks for being so amazing with committed actions with our kiddos. Awesome. Y'all, thank you again so much. Again, if you do ever have any questions and you didn't feel comfortable asking them today, no worries. Send me an email and I'm happy to help you. Your CEU certificates will be out once my beautiful virtual assistant gets them ready for y'all. But as long as you were here this evening, you will get credit for the CEU. If for some reason you have to watch the recording, no big deal. Send us one takeaway that you got from that at ace@acrossenvironments.com for your CEU certificate as well. Thanks, y'all. Have a great one.